The driver's hand shot out and grabbed my arm before I could open the door. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and tight, "please, don't get out yet." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was maybe 50, with the kind of face that had seen too much sun and not enough sleep. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "This is my daughter's house," I said. "I know." He didn't let go of my arm. "Give me 2 minutes, please." It was 11,047 at night. I'd been traveling since 6 that morning. A flight from Phoenix to Denver, then a connection that got delayed twice. My hip ached. My carry-on was wedged in the back seat, and this man, this stranger I'd trusted to drive me from Denver International to my daughter's house, was gripping my arm like I was about to step off a ledge. "You're hurting me," I said quietly. He let go immediately. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He pressed his fingers to his mouth, staring through the windshield at the house. The lights were on inside. All of them. Every room glowing at midnight. That was the first thing that felt wrong. My daughter knew I was coming. We'd spoken that morning before I boarded. She'd said she'd leave the porch light on, just the porch light. She had the baby, my granddaughter, 18 months old, and she went to bed early. Every light in that house was on. "What's your name?" I asked the driver. "Jean," he said. He exhaled slowly. "Jean Mallory." "Jean." I folded my hands in my lap. "Why don't you want me to go inside?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I started to reach for the door handle again. Then he said, "Because I've sat outside that house before, not as a driver. I am 68 years old. I taught 4th grade for 31 years in Scottsdale. I have 2 children, my son, who lives in Portland with his husband and their dog, and my daughter, who moved to Denver 4 years ago when she married. I am not a dramatic person. I do not look for trouble. I have lived a quiet life and I have been grateful for it. But I know, the way you know sometimes when you wake up at 3 a.m. and the house feels different. I know when something is wrong." "Before?" I said. "What does that mean, before?" Jean turned in his seat to face me properly. In the glow of the dashboard lights, I could see he was nervous. Not the nervous of someone who's done something wrong. The nervous of someone who knows something they don't want to say. "I was with Denver PD for 19 years, he said. "Financial Crimes Unit, last 8 of those. I retired 2 years ago and started driving for the app." He glanced back at the house. 18 months ago, we opened an investigation into a home care company. They were targeting elderly homeowners, getting power of attorney, redirecting accounts. We closed the case 6 months ago. Charges were filed." He stopped. "And?" I said. "The name that came up during the investigation." He looked at me carefully. "Your son-in-law's name came up." The air in that car became very still. "His name came up," I repeated. "As a referral source?" "He wasn't charged. There wasn't enough to charge him, but his name was in the files." Jean's jaw tightened. "When I picked you up tonight and I saw this address, I recognized it. And then you mentioned your daughter had just added you to her accounts last month to make things easier. You said that, remember? When you were on the phone." I had said that. I'd been on the phone with my son during the ride, telling him how my daughter had called last week and suggested I consolidate everything, move my savings into a joint account so she could help me manage things as I got older. She'd said it so gently. She'd said, "Mom, I just want to make sure you're taken care of." I had thought it was kind. "Jean," I said slowly, "what exactly are you telling me?" He reached into the center console and took out a card, a plain white card with a phone number. He held it but didn't hand it to me yet. "I'm telling you," he said, "that before you walk into that house tonight, you should know what you might be walking into. And I'm telling you that the lights being on at midnight when your daughter knew you were landing late, that's not nothing." Through the windshield, I watched a shadow pass behind the curtains of the front room. Someone moving. Pacing, maybe. My daughter's husband. I had never been able to put my finger on what bothered me about him. He was handsome, attentive in the way that people are when they're performing attentiveness. He called me by my first name without asking. He always seemed to be in the room when money came up in conversation, and somehow always seemed to drift out again before the conversation ended. Small things, the kind of small things a mother notices and then feels guilty for noticing. I need to call my daughter, I said. Yes, Jean said, but maybe not from outside the house. I called her from the car. It rang 4 times before she picked up, which was unusual. She always picked up on the second ring when she saw it was me. Mom? Her voice was too bright, too awake for nearly midnight. Are you almost here? I'm close, I said. Not quite a lie. Is everything all right? I saw all the lights on. A pause. A short pause, but I caught it. We're just up. The baby had a rough night. You know how she is. A small laugh. Are you in the cab? I'm in the car, yes. I'll be there soon. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hands. Jean was watching me in the rear-view mirror. She asked if I was in the cab. I said, "She's tracking the ride," he said. "They can do that. See where the driver is." Which meant she knew I was already on her street, which meant she knew I was already there and hadn't gotten out, and she hadn't said anything. Something moved in my chest then, not fear exactly, something older and sadder than fear. "Okay," I said, "tell me what to do." G made a call first. I sat in the back seat and listened to him talk quietly to someone, a former colleague I understood, still with the department. He spoke for about 4 minutes. When he hung up, he turned around again. "Someone is going to meet us," he said. "A detective I know. She works elder financial abuse cases now. She's off duty, but she says she'll come." He looked at me carefully. "Your daughter isn't in trouble. I want to say that clearly. But your son-in-law, there may be more that they've been waiting on. More than the referral." "Your daughter called your bank 2 days ago," Jean said, asking about the process for full account transfer with power of attorney. I felt the bottom of something fall away. 2 days ago. I had spoken to my daughter 2 days ago. She'd asked how I was sleeping. She'd asked if the monsoon season had been bad in Scottsdale this year. She'd asked, casually, if I'd ever thought about what would happen to my house if something happened to me. I'd told her I had a will. She'd said, "Oh, of course, I wasn't worried. I was just thinking about you." My house in Scottsdale, paid off 17 years ago, the only real asset I had besides my retirement accounts. 31 years of 4th grade. "How do you know about the bank call?" I asked. "I don't. Not officially." He met my eyes. "She called a branch manager I happen to know. He mentioned it because he'd seen the last name in our old case files and it made him uncomfortable. That's all. Nothing official, nothing that means anything yet." He paused. "It might mean nothing, yet." He paused. "It might mean nothing. But it might not." "No," he said quietly, "it might not." We sat on that street for 40 minutes. Jean bought me a coffee from a gas station 2 blocks away and brought it back while I waited. He didn't have to do that. I thought about that a lot since that he went and got me a coffee. That he came back. The detective arrived at 12:31. She was younger than I expected, with her hair still down like she'd been asleep when she got the call. She came to the passenger window and spoke to Jean first. Then she came around to my door and opened it and crouched down to my level. "I'm Adrian," she said. She didn't give her last name. "Jean told me who you are." "I'm so sorry you're sitting on this street at midnight." "It's not how I planned the evening," I said. She smiled. "Just a little." "Can I ask you some questions?" "Just to understand what's been happening." I told her everything. the call about consolidating accounts, the power of attorney conversation, the deed to my Scottsdale house. My daughter had asked me last Thanksgiving to bring it when I visited next, because she wanted to make sure it was current. I hadn't thought anything of it. I hadn't brought it, but I hadn't thought anything of it. Adrian listened without writing anything down. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Did your daughter ask you to sign anything before you came tonight?" she asked. I thought back to the phone call 3 days ago, making final arrangements for the trip. My daughter had mentioned there was some paperwork for my estate planning that a friend of her husband's, a notary, could help me with while I was there. Easy, she'd said. In and out. Just some things to get in order. I hadn't thought anything of it. "Yes," I said. Adrian looked at Jean. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I want you to know. You don't have to sign anything tonight. Or ever. You are under no obligation to go into that house. And if you do go in, you have rights that no one can take from you without your explicit, uncoerced consent." She paused. "Your daughter loves you." I genuinely believe that. Sometimes people who love you are also being used by someone who doesn't. I thought about my daughter's voice on the phone tonight. Too bright? Too awake? And underneath it, what? Something thin, something pulled tight. She was scared. I had been thinking she was in on it, but maybe she was scared. "I want to see her," I said. I did not go into the house that night the way I was supposed to. Adrian walked me to the door. Jean waited by the car. When my daughter opened the door and saw me standing there with a stranger who showed a badge, the color left her face entirely. "Mom," she whispered. "I'm all right," I told her. "Are you all right?" And she started crying. Standing in the doorway in her pajamas with the baby on her hip and every light blazing behind her, she put her hand over her mouth and she cried. Her husband was not in the front room. He was in the kitchen, on his phone. He came out when he heard voices, and when he saw Adrian's badge, the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Not guilt, exactly. Calculation, the rapid calculation of someone figuring out what they could still salvage. He said something about it being late and asking what this was about. Adrian spoke to him calmly. I didn't listen to all of it. I was watching my daughter. She would not look at her husband. She kept looking at me. And her face. My daughter's face, which I have known since the moment it was red and furious and new in the delivery room. Her face was a woman who had been told something was a good idea until she no longer remembered if she had ever believed otherwise. I took the baby from her arms and held her. She was warm and heavy, and she smelled like baby shampoo, and she grabbed my necklace with both hands. I stood there in my daughter's foyer, holding my granddaughter while Adrian talked to her husband in the kitchen, and my daughter cried quietly into a tissue, and the clock on the wall said 1008 in the morning. The paperwork Adrian had them show her, the papers the notary friend was going to help me sign the next day, included a durable power of attorney transferring financial control and a quitclaim deed for my Scottsdale house. My husband built that house. We bought the land when my children were small, when we couldn't afford much, and my husband worked weekends for a year on the framing. He died in 2019. It is the only thing of his I have left, besides the photographs and a small pile of things in a shoebox in my closet. My son-in-law had found a buyer. The paperwork already had a buyer's name on it. He had done this before. Not identical, the cases were never identical, but the pattern was familiar enough. An elderly parent, an adult child who trusted a spouse. Small steps, gradual, each one reasonable sounding on its own. My daughter had not understood the full shape of it. I believe that. I believed it when I saw her face. I believe it now. My son-in-law left that night, his own choice. Adrian didn't have grounds to hold him, but she made clear that an investigation would be opened and that he should have an attorney. He took a bag. He did not say goodbye to the baby. My daughter and I sat in her kitchen for a long time after. She made tea. She didn't drink. I ate half a sleeve of crackers because I hadn't eaten since the layover in Salt Lake City. The baby finally fell asleep on the floor on a blanket, her little mouth open, her arms flung wide, the way babies sleep. I thought he was just trying to help, my daughter said. I know. He said you were getting older and you needed a plan. He said we were doing you a favor. She looked at her mug. I asked him once if we should just talk to you. Directly. He said it would stress you out. He said it would stress you out. He said it would stress you out. He said you'd refuse just out of pride. She looked up. I believed him. I thought about that, about how a person who loves you can be made to believe that helping you means going around you. That care is the same as control. I'm not angry at you, I said. She shook her head. You should be. Maybe, but I'm not. I covered her hand with mine. I'm here. We're going to figure it out. Gene Mallory. I've thought about him so many times since that night. He didn't have to say anything. He had picked up hundreds of passengers in 2 years of driving. He owed me nothing. He could have pulled up to the curb, popped the trunk, wished me a good night. Instead, he sat outside a house he recognized on a street he hadn't been on in 18 months, and he held on to something that bothered him, and he decided to say it out loud to a stranger in his back seat. I wrote him a letter, eventually. A real letter. On paper, because I didn't have another way to reach him. I gave it to Adrian and asked if she could pass it along. I don't know if she did. I don't know if he ever read it. But I meant what I wrote, that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply name the thing that feels wrong. Not fix it. Not solve it. Just say, I see something here that doesn't look right. I'm not going to pretend I don't see it. My daughter's divorce was finalized 9 months later. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy. Her husband's attorney argued that his involvement was minimal, that he'd been acting in good faith, that nothing had actually been signed. He was not wrong that nothing had been signed. The investigation didn't produce charges. Something about intent being hard to prove, about documentation gaps, about how these things go. Adrian told me not to be surprised. She also told me she'd be watching. My daughter sold her house in Denver and moved back to Scottsdale 8 months ago. She and the baby are in the apartment 2 streets over from me. On Tuesday evenings, we eat dinner together, usually something easy, pasta or soup or whatever's on sale. The baby is almost 3 now, and she has started calling me by a word that is somewhere between grandma and something entirely made up, and I am keeping that word, and I am not correcting her. My house is still mine. The deed is in a safety deposit box at my bank, and my attorney has the information for the box, and my son knows where the attorney's number is, and I have made sure, very deliberately, that the people who love me know the full shape of things, that there is no fog that can be handed, no kindness that needs to go around me. That is the thing I think about when I think about that night. Not the fear, though I was afraid. Not the anger, though I was angry later when I understood it all more clearly. What I think about is how easy it was. How many small, reasonable-sounding steps there were between your mother is getting older and sign here. How a person who loves you can be moved step by step into something they would never have agreed to if they'd been shown it all at once. Pay attention to the lights that are on when they shouldn't be. Listen to the person who says wait when everything in you wants to just get out of the car and get inside and finally be home. Sometimes the stranger holding your arm is the only one who can see what you cannot. I keep coming back to that moment when Jean's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because of how close I came to pulling away. How close I came to saying, "Excuse me," in that polite, firm way I've been saying it my whole life, and getting out of that car and walking up to that door and signing whatever was put in front of me the next morning. That's the part that stays with me, not what happened, what almost happened. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the people in this story and why things turned out the way they did. Not in a punishing way, more like trying to understand the shape of it. My son-in-law was a man who believed, I think, that wanting something badly enough was a kind of justification, that if the goal was achievable, the path to it was acceptable. He was smart, genuinely smart, but he had pointed that intelligence entirely at the question of how, and never once seriously at the question of whether, and that is its own kind of blindness. A sharp mind aimed in the wrong direction doesn't protect you. It just takes you further, faster, somewhere you shouldn't go. My daughter is a good person who stopped trusting her own discomfort. I understand that now. She told me once, months after everything, that there were moments when something felt off, a question he asked too casually, a form he mentioned too quickly. And she had talked herself out of it every time. She'd told herself she was being paranoid, unsophisticated about money, too emotional. She had a word for every instinct that tried to protect her, and every word was a dismissal. Learning to trust yourself again after that, to take your own unease seriously, that takes a different kind of courage than most people talk about. Not the loud kind, the quiet daily kind of deciding that your judgment is worth something. And Jean. I think about Jean the most, honestly, a retired detective who could have driven in silence and gone home and made no decisions that weren't required of him. He'd earned that. Nobody would have blamed him. But something in him, some stubborn, decent part, could not sit quietly next to something wrong. He didn't have proof. He didn't have authority. He had a bad feeling and a white-knuckle grip on a steering wheel and the willingness to say, "I might be wrong about this, but I can't not say it." That is what doing right actually looks like most of the time. Not certainty, not comfort, just the refusal to look away. I am 68 years old and I am still learning things. I'm learning that being careful about who you trust is not the same as being closed, that asking questions is not ingratitude, that the people who love you most will not be threatened by your clarity, and that if someone is, that itself is information. My house is still mine. My granddaughter calls me something close to grandma, and it is the best sound I know. My daughter and I eat dinner together on Tuesday evenings, and we talk, really talk, the way we hadn't in years. That's what came from one man deciding to speak up. I think about what I want to carry forward from all of it. Not bitterness, because bitterness is just fear wearing a different coat. What I want to carry is something simpler, the habit of paying attention, the honesty to name what I see, and the nerve to stay in the difficulty long enough to come out the other side. Those three things, together, I've come to believe they're the difference between a life that happens to you and a life you actually live.